But
Looking
tell
forward to
me about you, man. First, introduce yourself. Where you at? What are you working on? And we'll start from
it.
there.
So I'm Riso from South Korea. What I'm working on is a company called the Garrison. Our aim is to become the literal garrison for the entrepreneurs in Korea. Our company's mission has been globalization of South Korean startup ecosystem for quite a long time, about 6 years now so far, including the time that we've been running Terminal, which was like a small company, and still we are a small company. But when we say globalization, people often misunderstand it as, oh, you help Korean startups going abroad, or you help foreign companies coming to Korea. But practically, it's more about making the ecosystem itself as a small globe so that entrepreneurs can really learn how to expand abroad and also support the other foreign founders to come into Korea. And the reason that we were focusing on that is because the South Korean startup ecosystem is one of the isolated startup ecosystem along the world. Like Korea and Japan, same, I guess. We speak one language, one singular language that is aimed for us. The user of the language is quite limited. And even the entrepreneurial mindset, we have about 23 unicorns in South Korea, and 83% of them are focused on the domestic market. So that's how domestic focused and quite isolated we are when it comes to startup. And considering the population decline in South Korea, we would eventually have to jump into an immigrant phase of a nation. So I'm just trying to pave that way ahead, developing entrepreneurs, foreign entrepreneurs, mostly focused, and mixing them with the local Korean entrepreneurs as an atmosphere. And to do so, we're running a community. We are currently preparing to establish an association of foreign founders in Korea, and so on.
Nice. I like it, man. You touched on like 4 or 5 different topics I want to dive into. But first, before we go into those, tell me a little bit of the background of the terminal.
Terminal was like our first, I would say, guinea pig. So it all started from a like random idea. I was an interpreter in these projects, and then I learned how many fake numbers are going and coming in these kind of export exhibitions. So I learned that Korean entrepreneurial society should really change. We should work up to the global standard. We should not need interpreters when it comes to discussing business, and we have to be, a bit more developed especially when it comes to the global expansion. So I reached out to my co-founder and said, I have this idea. I want to work on this project, since he was doing a lot of import-export business. He found it interesting. We started from the scratch. The terminal is like, in South Korea, if you become an entrepreneur, it's either you incorporate it or you start as a sole proprietorship. And we started as a sole proprietorship, which don't really have any limits on putting name of the company. So we just set it up as Terminal. We started as a startup agency. We reached out to multiple startups abroad, and then tried to bring their wholesalership to Korea, trying to make the sales, which didn't really work out that easily. But starting from there, we started to develop networks in the Korean ecosystem, and that ended up becoming the Garrison.
I like it. It evolved over time.
Yeah.
Perfect. Talk to me. You mentioned, one topic that is starting to get more and more publicity, but still not enough, is the population decline that we're seeing. In places like South Korea, Japan, Singapore, we're seeing these developed economies who are, trying to start building their startup ecosystems, but they're having a major population decline. I think South Korea's population growth rate is at like 0.8% or 0.8, which to at least keep your population stable, you need like 2.21.
Yeah.
I think they have like worst or second worst like in the world right now for developed countries. What have you seen that the South Korean government and maybe culturally is happening to kind of work on that problem?
Okay, that's a tough one to crack. I mean, we have South Korean government policies. It's not really designed in detail that often. It's pretty straightforward. I'll give you money, make kids. It's not really like it's not a policy that just naturally attract you to this phase and to this road of making families and learning the goodness of having kids. No, it's more like we'll give you subsidies. Okay, we'll give you extra services. So it's pretty straightforward. So overall, that will be like the way of government subsidizing it. But as population decline, like tax revenue also declines, which means we're having less and less room to really subsidize it by cash or in kind. So strategies are changing over time. When it comes to the foreign immigrant, South Korean population, pure Korean population turned into a minus phase since 2023. On average, we had about 20,000 immigrant applicants per annum until 2023. And since last year, 2024, it all of a sudden spiked up to like 50,000. So that's how much Korean government is receiving the immigrants to Korea. But although very conservative in many ways, usually spouses. Also, historic figures, last year is the first year that foreign population in South Korea has ever exceeded 5%. So most of the foreign populations in Korea are either spouse or foreign employees who are working in Korea in blue-collar sectors. Now they're trying to extend that interest to tech developers, digital nomads, or entrepreneurs, but which is very, very difficult to attract, by the way. So
talk to me about that. Well, one, I wanted to make a point of, I almost feel bad asking that question because, we're seeing all these different countries around the world who are trying different strategies. There are some who are, I think the president of Hungary, it was like if you have, they made a law, if you have 5 kids, you get 0 taxes. So like no more taxes for your family. Italy, they like have appointed somebody to help with, spearhead that. And it might be because this is such a new problem and, it takes a while to have kids and see the, change over time over a couple of years. But a lot of these strategies that different countries are trying to implement really aren't having, the effects that they want. So it's been a very interesting problem to see over the next few years. And we'll see, over the next 10 years, really, who is able to come up with a strategy that works for solving this, or if anybody is. So fingers crossed, I hope South Korea figures it out. It's
I think we should accept the fact globally we're going to have population decline and aging society. And I am 100% confident that nobody's going to solve this. It's a very difficult problem to untangle. So
it's very difficult to tell people, hey, you shouldn't have a child. But we'll move on to the next one. You mentioned they're trying to attract more startup and remote work talent. I saw just recent, I think it was last month, Japan just announced starting in April they'll be doing a 2-year startup visa. If you're a founder, what sort of programs are happening like that in South Korea right now?
So I'll tell you a quite a well crunched down story in comparison with Japan and Korea. South Korea, we originally had a program called Oasis program, which is a program for foreign entrepreneurs who are willing to come into Korea. It's like a visa program. You go through this either education course, get invested, like it all considers into an amount of points. And if you exceed a certain level of point, then you get to have this visa. And even within that visa, there's like tech entrepreneur visa and like import and export trading visa, and so on and so forth. Then we felt how pointless it is to, asking for performance such regularly, because like if you get to have this visa, it lasts for about 2 years, and although it takes about 1 year to even get one, if you can't make a revenue in the first year, you're most likely to lose that visa. So imagine as an entrepreneur, if you could really make that revenue happen in the first year, that's pretty impossible, right? So what came up is that the South Korean government has announced a new visa called Startup Visa. So it's as simple. They just need to file in their pitch deck, and once they're selected, they're gonna be invited to pitch. And once they pitch, if they get accepted, they're gonna get the visa for 6 months first. And within 6 months, if you get to establish a company, then you automatically get to have 2 years of runway. And then after 2 years,
real quick, is there any language requirement for that, or
no? Everything can be done in English. Yeah, and after 2 years, if you get reviewed and if your revenue kind of proves that you have shown a growth, then you can extend another 3 years. In Japan, Japanese government, designates key players in the ecosystem to provide such, visa sponsor to the founders who are coming into Japan, and the system is much more field focused, organized in Japan, and Korea is much more expert and the public officers' point of view of dealing with these visas. So very two different angles. Yeah.
We got to talk to Tyler Sahib last year, who was also a fellow founder down there in Seoul, and he gives a lot of good insights. But if I'm looking at potentially expanding or like moving my startup operation to South Korea, talk to me about some of the benefits of like what makes the South Korean and like Seoul startup scene really stand out.
I'll be very blunt because I don't want to give any kind of wrong ideas. This is like, if you're coming to Korea 101, I always tell them, if you are a B2C startups, don't come to Korea. If you are B2B, still don't come to Korea. It's not an easy market to crack if you're trying to crack the Korean market, because basically the decision makers or most of the people you get to meet in this corporate world is also non-English speaking most of the time. And even if you want to crack open an opportunity and really make a sales, the process is very different. Like, Asian culture overall, we don't often use products because it's efficient. We use products because it's my friend's company or it's my cousin's company or someone in my team. That many corporate world has such system of implementing new technologies or whatever, and also like I think it's a common phenomenon happening out of the non-English speaking countries, especially when they're isolated, is that Russia, they have Zoom for Russia, they have Google for Russia, they have McDonald's for Russia. Same with Korea, we have Carta for Korea, we have Google for Korea, we have even Microsoft Office in a Korean version. It's the same function, but it's in Korean. So how we localize is so important. And I see a lot of foreign founders coming into Korea and say, hey, we have localized it, but apparently I can definitely tell they've been using Google Translators or DeepL as an API. So there is a very clear limit in such translations. Yeah, it's a tough market to crack, but if you are planning to come to Korea, the advantage is that you have an access to like Japanese ecosystem at the same time. You can check on Japan, you can check in Korea and see where to go, and eventually you can find out. It's super cheap. It's about hour distance, just going to Japan and check out their ecosystem, and you extend your visa as a tourist visa in Japan for 3 months and then come back to Korea for 3 months. A lot of people does that as a back and forth extension of their visas. And these two ecosystems are competing to look good to the immigrant entrepreneurs and say, hey, please come to our country. So I think you will get to have that bargaining power in between two ecosystems. And lastly, the most toughest part is running the venture investments in South Korea. It's going to be very difficult if you're foreigners, because we have a very rare case of foreign founders getting invested in South Korea. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah. It very much, there's the common phrase here in the U.S. of "it's not what you know, it's who you know."
Yeah.
But I think that goes, twice for especially working in the Asian markets. Not to generalize. I used to live in China, and I was working with some international contracts, and it 100% is like who you know. And the only reason I got the business I did was because I had a friend of a coworker of somebody who vouched for me. Which makes it hard because you almost have to, be there for a few years and like build up that network and build up that community before you have that trust, before you can start, using that to be successful, business-wise. So it's very chicken or the egg. You build
in that sense. If I kind of show you like slight of an possible opportunity that is uprising in Korea, especially if you're a foreign founder, is that there are increasing number of foreigners in South Korea, and their market is pretty tough to be covered by the Korean founders. Because Korean founders, they struggle to dig into this foreigners ecosystem, but it's hard because they can't speak English often. They don't know how to deal with your UIs and UX, and many foreign founders are covering that 2.5 million foreigner population. And that is big enough market, but not big enough to go as a unicorn. But the thing is, it's gradually growing. So that's one thing that we can deroute it. Another thing is that, yes, South Korea has a great deal of STEM talents. Yes, we do. But however, the great STEM talents are all leaving to states. It's a brain drain issue. Great STEM talents, eventually they know how to speak English, and they would rather leave Korea and work in the Silicon Valley, or somebody pays you well, right? And so like if you're a really great STEM talent, Korea might be another opportunity that you can have a comparative advantage against all the players within the ecosystem. And top of everything, South Korea, as I said, South Korean supports are very straightforward. So we have so much subsidies, grants, and like even facilities. So there's a bio hub in center of Korea. It's not even that big. It's a rural area, but they literally, the startup institution literally provides you the factory for your GMP facility. So
and this is for testing things like biomedical devices.
Yeah, exactly. And we have a different level of Fab Lab. Now, a couple of regional provinces are purchasing GPU from NVIDIA so that they can have like servers and infrastructure set up for the AI startups to start at their province. So, yes, it sounds insane, but we do have a pretty good infrastructural support and subsidies also.
I'm assuming those grants and subsidies you mentioned are coming from the government?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's very fascinating seeing, I'm pretty sure I talk about this on every episode. So, if my listeners are listening, they're probably tired of hearing about it. But, all these communities around the world that are starting to see the value in creating their own startup ecosystem, which it's very I feel like it's driven by multiple things of, hey, like they built Silicon Valley. It took about 50 years, but, they built it there. Why can't we have that here? And I think there's also the other end of the spectrum of, if we don't start building these things now, we're just going to be behind everybody else whenever they get ahead. So I think a lot of governments are starting to see the value in this. I don't want to keep going back to Japan, but, Fukuoka and I want to say Yokohama. Yeah, those two are really investing a ton into their local startup scene. I'm very happy to hear things are popping up in South Korea too, and everybody knows Seoul, but what other areas are you starting to see some activity in? I think I haven't been able to go to South Korea yet. I hope to in the very near future. But the only two places I've really heard a lot about are Seoul, Busan, and Jeju Island from probably watching too much reality TV. But
when it comes to an ecosystem, so there is Seoul and there is Gyeonggi that's wrapping the Seoul. So Seoul is inside Gyeonggi as a capital city, but not really Gyeonggi provincial Seoul city. But it looks like it, but not. No, it's separate. And because of that, Gyeonggi has like massive population. So Gyeonggi has all these tech valley. They have probably like a couple of headquarters of unicorn companies in Gyeonggi already. And that would be like a tech savvy startup region. When it comes to just below Gyeonggi, there is Daejeon. Daejeon is a tech cluster of South Korea for the last 50 years. It's the R&D, all the government R&D infrastructures, university that is known for these tech developments, and R&D infrastructures are mostly in Daejeon area. And this Daejeon area has, since it has such a strong infrastructure, it's been developing a lot of good biotech startups, space tech startups, like those kind of industries where you have this particular need for such infrastructures to develop something from itself. So Daejeon would be that region. Busan region is the region in South Korea that is having the fastest brain drain and loss in population. So that in Busan, yes, there are tech-savvy startups, there are a lot of tech entrepreneurs, but also you can see a very interesting mixture of like agri-tech startups, mobility startups, or non-tech driven startups as well. Also cold chain startups. You'll see a bit more of diversity when it comes to an entrepreneur, like even a mom and pop shop starting to implement innovations into their systems and trying to turn their company into a startup. Like we can see those kind of interesting movements happening down there.
I can see, like you were talking about earlier, some foreigners will do 3 months in South Korea, then 3 months in Japan, and back and forth. And I think right there in Busan, you can catch a ferry to Fukuoka, and I think it's like a 3-hour ferry back and forth. So I would assume, probably a lot of them are there. But we'll wrap this up on a more fun kind of personal note. Like I said earlier, I teach a lot of college age entrepreneurs and first time founders. If you had to give a piece of advice to these young founders, what would you give?
I meet a lot of them in Korea, and I see a lot of foreign students coming into Korea for these kind of advice. But I give a very different advice against what I give to Korean founders and foreign founders. Like, for foreign founders, not non-Korean founders, I would just say, just find the market. Don't fall in love with your solution, fall in love with the problem, and just focus on that and just validate the problem. And yes, sometimes problem may not validate, but it might be worth solving. And if you feel like it, then you have the time, which I would say the young age, as a comparative advantage. I mean, enjoy failing, constantly fail. I mean, I myself is still failing in a couple of my other projects, and I don't really mind. It's just it's a process. Failure is a process, not an outcome. So I'll just tell them to focus on that.
Perfect. Well, Riso, thank you so much for your time today, man. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Grant.